Irvington Historical Society's webinar entitled The Finish Line, a retrospective of Peter Oley, beloved coach and teacher. My name is Scott Mosenthal, and I will be your host for today's webinar. Last December, the Irvington Historical Society highlighted one of Irvington's two resident coaching Hall of Famers. Both of these iconic coaches have achieved mind-boggling accomplishments and had a significant influence on thousands of student athletes. Rather amazingly, both lived across the street from each other on Riverview Road in Irvington. Legendary coach Gina Marr and her remarkable varsity girls basketball program was the subject of the December webinar. Today's presentation will feature presenters as well as videos highlighting the impact that Peter Oley, perhaps one of the most influential Irvington residents in the past half century, had on them as a coach, a colleague, and a friend. They range from those who were on Peter's first team in 1956 to the current Irvington High School cross-country and track coach who succeeded him in 2007. There have been dozens of written submissions in the past 2 months from those who remember Coach Oley. Today's four presenters, all former students and athletes of his, have been given the unenviable task of editing those submissions, including their own, into roughly 7-minute segments. Please note, however, that we have kept every submission in its entirety, and those will be later posted on the Historical Society's website, as will this webinar. In addition, we have a half-dozen video clips from former runners, students, and colleagues. The presentation will last slightly over an hour, and we ask that if you have any comments or questions, please submit those via the chat button at the end of the program. Also, please note that this will hopefully be part one of a two-part series about Peter Oley. Our goal is to present a future webinar highlighting his significant roles as a village environmental activist and Irvington historian for close to 30 years. My first introduction is the composer and instrumentalist of this webinar soundtrack. Liam Oley, son of Eric and grandson of Peter, is an Irvington High School senior and an accomplished musician and songwriter who in 8th grade composed the music for the Irvington Historical Society's production of An Evening with the Hamiltons. He's a member of the Irvington Cross Country, Indoor Track, and Spring Track programs. He plans on pursuing his composing interest in college. We will now begin the program with a poetic rendition of Peter's life and career. A story in rhyme about the master storyteller, or a poem about Pete. If you ever met Coach Oley, you were quickly taken in by his incredible knowledge and that quirky grin. His unparalleled memory, his unquenchable passion, made his program unique as his team sprang into action. On a personal note, I was his assistant for years. 23 we worked together. Blood, sweat, and tears. Innumerable trips to races and meets. I heard all of his stories and all their repeats. To spend a full day with Pete was amazing, though others might have reacted with eyes a-glazing. But I honestly loved his passion for runners. Track meets and kids were his bread and his butter. We gather today in honor of Pete, to remember the man and his remarkable feats. You'll hear from a bunch who recall this man Oley, who impacted their lives in a way almost holy. So let's take a look at Peter's career. If he were here talking, it would take most of a year. He grew up in North T-Town a number of years past. Wash Irving, it said, was enrolled in his class. Pete soon found his forte running on trails on the Rockies estate, where he talked to the quails. To Doc Rasbeck, his coach, Pete was as close as a son. He was a track junkie. He was destined to run. He made the state meet, finished a bit back in the pack, but he was now off and running and never looked back. He was then off to Brockport, where he maintained his zeal. He majored in track and minored in field. He decided that teaching would be his career. He started at Dows Lane, made $3,000 his first year. Coaching soon followed, his earnings soon flowered. He was coaching 3 seasons at 10 cents an hour. At Dows he held meets where his boys ran like rockets. At the flagpole they'd move, with him yelling, "Hip pockets!" The aqueduct became home for the Harrier team, and it wasn't before long that the dogs reigned supreme. The years soon flew by, as did Peter's bosses. He outlasted 17. He had fewer career losses. He sowed a few oats and squired a few bells, drove his cherry red MG like a bat out of hell. He eventually settled down when he married a Finn, his father-in-law threw a mean javelin. Children soon followed. The Oleys had 3. All were track aces, an all-star family. He coached and sold candles and dug all the pits. He forgot not a time, not even a split. The lines he would mark, the track he would drag. To Penn he would go with his green leather bags. He coached in the fall, the spring, and the winter. Throwers and runners, jumpers and sprinters. More often than not, he'd win, place, or show. A Westchester fixture, his stature did grow. Accolades he accrued, all the state knew his name. State records, state champs, and 2 halls of fame. Closer to home, there's the trot, the track, and the woods, all named in his honor. This coach was good. Today we look back thanks to his students, colleagues, and runners. His impact's been tremendous. It fills us with wonder. So we'll jog down memory lane with this coach, teacher, and friend. A one-of-a-kind, an Irvingtonian legend. I would like next to introduce the presenters. First is Peter's son, Eric, Irvington High School class of '85 and member of numerous Irvington High School cross-country and track teams, still holds the school record in the javelin. He has inherited all his dad's running collection, which means he no longer has the use of his basement, his garage, or his guest bedroom. But it also means that he provided perhaps 90% of the photos and the documents you will see today. Nancy Pfister Jameson, Irvington High School class of '82, was the heart and soul of Coach Oley's early girls cross-country and track teams. She was also a student of Coach Oley and has been an elementary school teacher for 30 years. David Darvasey Allison, Irvington High School class of '94, won numerous league and sectional titles and still holds 4 school records. He also finished 3rd in the Class C state cross-country meet and later ran at UPenn. Today, he is an accomplished masters runner and is a teacher and track coach in Phoenix, Arizona. Finally, Noah Kornman, Irvington High School class of '92, was a runner for Coach Oley's track teams who won numerous league titles, qualified for the state meet, and won the prestigious Con Ed Scholar Athlete Award. He later ran for Columbia University and is currently the executive director of SAY, the Stuttering Association for the Young. Let's go now to Eric for his part of the program.
Hello. We're going to start with some memories from the very early years. We'll start with the great Frank Gilligan, IHS class of 1956. I remember Pete helping me with a 100 and 220-yard dash. He told me not to straighten up too fast in the 100-yard dash. My best time in the 100 was 10.4. We ran at Children's Village. We didn't have a track. All the tracks we ran on were cinder, and so we needed spikes. Frank was fast. He made it onto the 1956 Western Westchester League All-Stars. Next is Rick Marshall, IMS class of 1958. What was it like growing up in Irvington during the 1950s? I seldom reminisce about growing up in Irvington without remembering Peter Oley. I was here when he first arrived as an assistant Irvington High School track coach. He was serious and he was humble. And though the magnitude of Peter Oley's success with generations and many hundreds of youth is in the record books, his contribution to Irvington is too big to be able to accurately be added up. Next, we have Gene Deutscher, IHS class of 1960. Coach Oley drove me home from practice each day in his red MG. He was a bachelor at the time, residing in North Tarrytown. We lived on his way home. My mother would have dinner waiting for us. The rest of the family had already eaten. Coach Oley even came down to Duke University to talk to the track coach when I visited with my parents. After Duke University, I was an officer in the United States Marine Corps with a duty assignment in Vietnam. I received several handwritten letters from Coach Oley while I was there. Each was a pep talk, just like the ones he would give you 5 minutes before the gunfire to start the race. You can do this. He was one of the first people I called when I returned to the United States. Thanks to Coach Oley, running has been a part of my life since I met him. He taught me commitment to self and commitment to team. Next up, we have Jim Brennan, another local legend, class of 1965. Coach Oley was like a second father to me. I ran cross country while I was in the 7th and 8th grade, and I was a middle of the pack runner. But at one race at Blue Mountain, I finished 19th out of 150 runners. Coach Oley made a big deal out of it, saying afterwards, "I want to thank Jimmy Brennan for finishing in the top 20 today. Great effort." And this gave my ego a tremendous boost. I've never forgotten it. Coach Oley was always encouraging. No matter where someone finished, he always encouraged you to do your best. He always waited at the finish line for the last person to finish and always congratulated them. My son Kevin wanted to run cross country for Irvington so he could get a varsity jacket and impress the girls. He was not much of a runner and always finished last. Once, however, he managed to beat another kid at a meet at New Rochelle. Kevin was so happy. He kept saying, "I beat someone." And of course, Coach Oley made a big deal out of it, just as he did 35 years earlier for me. He is one of the best people I've ever met. Next, we have Bob Prince, IHS class of 1970. I was a classic underachiever in middle and high school, and as a result, my college applications academically were pretty much laughable. But Pete pushed hard on my behalf, writing letters to his track connections at different colleges. I ended up being accepted at multiple schools and received an excellent collegiate education, including a master's degree in later years. I'm convinced that this wouldn't have been possible without Peter Oley's efforts. He basically gave me a second chance in the area of academics and the arts, and I took full advantage of what was offered. I owe so much to this man. He was a role model, disciplinarian, mentor, and a really nice guy. He opened a lot of doors for me and many others. Couldn't possibly be more thankful for everything he represented in my life. The end of the decade brought a new red cinder track up to the IHS campus. The late 60s also brought another child into the Oley household, me, joining my older sister Ann, and with that came a move to a bigger house on Irving Place and the requisite station wagon, a type of vehicle that would become the Oley family vehicle of choice for many years to come. First was the 1970 green Pontiac track dragger pictured here. We called it the track dragger because my father would use it to drive around the track, dragging a section of fence when the track surface would become rutted by the rain. My father would put 5-year-old me on top of a piece of plywood to weigh down the fence. Not a good idea. I would come home covered in dust and cinders. Yet my mother, desperate for some alone time, still entrusted me to my father's care. Here we are during the 1973 cross-country season, an example of what was a typical weekend in my childhood. We even had some moments away from track meets for some father-son time doing typical things like throwing the javelin in the backyard. But I finally made it to the high school and could spend some time with my father as my official coach. And we had some great times and we had some great teams. Which brings me to the Oley family vehicle of the 1980s, the Pontiac Catalina Safari wagon. After the 1983 cross-country season, I was fortunate enough to make the Section 1 team that competed in the State Federation Championships up in Syracuse, along with fellow Bulldogs Tara and Dawn Fitzpatrick. Being that we were only 3 athletes competing for Irvington, my father drove us up to the meet in the giant blue Safari wagon. It had been a long rainy day, and after the races were over, we were all eager to get home. As my father was racing down I-87, we suddenly saw flashing lights behind the car. We were getting pulled over. My father always talked first. Sorry, officer. We were just driving back from a cross-country meet in Syracuse. These kids made the New York State Federation meet. License and registration, please. Did you say cross-country? I ran cross-country in high school. My father looked at his nameplate. Hanson, did you run in New York State? Yes, I grew up on Long Island. I ran at William Floyd High School. For Coach Frank Jones, did you run at the 1974 state meet at Sunken Meadow? Our team came in second that year in Class C. Wait, are you Marty Hanson? You outkicked George Vogel, the best runner from our section that day. You ran a great race, officer. Thank you. Now I need you to obey the speed limit, sir. Please get home safely, and you guys have a good night. He'd gotten out of a speeding ticket. And I remember turning around and looking at Tara and Dawn with our mouths wide open. My father was always telling stories about runners from old, reciting times and places from the past, but this was unbelievable. I don't think we stopped laughing for the rest of that ride home. And finally, after 25 years of coaching, my father got a bus driver's license so he could drive his full teams to train and to race. And I'm sure others will share memories of jump curves and near misses, but I must end it here. Next up, we have Fred Hurlitz and Tom Quinn from the IHS class of 1982.
Greetings, Irvington. Tiger Hurlitz
Tom Quinn.
here at Fern Hill Park in Portland, Oregon. We are the class of 1982.
Correct.
Tom, tell me your favorite Peter Oley story.
Well, you know, actually, the first, I still remember the first time I met Pete. So I was in 3rd grade, and the Dows Lane Elementary School had what they called the Olympics every year. And there was something called the long run, which, you know, in retrospect was probably 200 yards. It was one lap around the field. And I ran and I got second. And I was a little disappointed. And I was standing there, so I'm 9 years old, and this guy like emerges from the crowd, and he's got, in my memory, he had a giant beard and giant hair, and he was wearing a tie-dyed shirt and a headband. He looked crazy. And he came out and he had his thick bottle glasses, and he was like, "That was great, that was great." He was so enthusiastic, and he kept talking about how when I was in high school I could run track for him. And I was like, well, you know, I didn't think too much about it. And sure enough, all those years later, I ran. But it wasn't even that long later because I actually had him as a teacher in 5th and 6th grade. So, and so just what I remember about him from that very first time was just the enthusiasm. Like, he was so enthusiastic about not only my performance, but about running and the future, that it was contagious. It was amazing. So.
You were almost recruited in a way.
Yes, he would, well, I don't want to say recruited, but he definitely, you know, went out of his way to introduce himself to me, and it was great. So it was the beginning of my friendship.
When I had the opportunity to run with you we were on a team together.
Many years,
which was awesome. And so I'm thankful for him to bring people together, which is essentially what he did.
Right.
Tell me also, I recall running with you senior year and you wore red shorts. Why the red shorts?
Well, it's not nothing fancy. The Irvington, the uniforms were horrible. I don't know if I remember correctly, but they were like green satin with no liners.
Yeah.
And then there was, I don't know what you were supposed to do. So I had a comfortable pair of running shorts that were red, and I didn't think a big deal out of it. And Pete let me run in them all the time. And of course, one time we won some race, and the opposing coach complained, and they disqualified us after the fact. So I never got to wear my red shorts again.
Got it. So they went away.
They went away.
Got it.
Yeah, they were just nice shorts, that's all. Having been a teacher, the thing about Pete too, like, he was so into the outdoors.
Yes.
So that was a big thing for me.
I remember that.
Very influential. When
Yeah.
In 3rd grade, he told me, by the time I was in 5th grade, he was describing how he'd taken a 3-week backpacking trip alone in Wyoming. And to me, that was just like, I'd never known anyone who had done that.
Yes.
And that was really influential, and I
Yes.
did similar things. And the other thing is, you know, he built his own house largely.
He talked about the beam.
Yeah, he
Remember
was,
this?
he was totally
the
in the
beam
wood. Yeah,
was like You heard
Yeah.
more about the beam.
than everything. And so that was interesting that he built his house, and I always thought that was really, 'cause that's fairly uncommon.
What I took from the conversation around the beam, it was less about the beam, it was more about the passion he had for the building of this structure.
Right.
Which did not influence you. I mean,
Oh, completely. Like again,
the outdoors, building,
Yep. No, he's very
using your hands.
Yeah, and it's so yeah. He was totally into wood. All the things. He was a really great teacher.
Greetings, Irvington. Tiger Hurlitz weighing in from the home office in Portland, Oregon, where I've just had the good fortune of visiting with Tom Quinn, and we talked so fondly about Peter Oley, and hopefully you see some of that conversation in the video snippets to follow. I remember running for Peter Oley, and if you ran for Peter Oley, you had a huge sense of pride. If you ran cross country or track, you were somebody, and that confidence just helped so much as you were an adolescent and growing up and trying to figure things out. You could have been a high school quarterback on any other team, but if you ran for Peter Oley, you were somebody, and you felt that pride, and you felt that support, and you felt that camaraderie, and you felt that teamwork. I take his lessons so fondly, and I live by them daily, and I think about them daily. The guy was a legend.
Hi everyone, I'm Nancy Jameson, and I was asked to talk today about what it was like to be a female runner on Coach Oley's team. And the answer is really quite simple. To be a runner on Coach Oley's team, to be a female runner on Coach Oley's team was to be a runner on Coach Oley's team. In other words, I really believe that Mr. Oley valued each runner for who they were and what they brought to the team. So his passion for coaching really seemed to transcend gender stereotypes. He appreciated us as individual runners on a team, and his expectations were high and reasonable for each of us, regardless of our gender. He coached us all with measured skill and often unbridled enthusiasm. All the stories that poured in from former runners, students, colleagues, and coaches for this project portray a unique man of compassion and conviction, as well as humor and humility. I'd like to share a few of those stories now. Doug Talbot, class of 1984, wrote in saying, "I loved Coach Oley. He played an influential role in my love for running, which led me to run track in college. He was strategic and competitive, yet always took time to make sure we were having fun. Even when he was serious, he always seemed to end with a smile and a laugh. In the fall of 1983, Coach Oley pulled me aside and said very excitedly, 'Debbie, we've got a secret weapon this year. We've got Samantha Kirby.' He went on to explain how Sam had spent her whole summer running every day, that she kept getting lost during her runs and ended up running 2 to 3 times the distance she had planned. Coach was right. Sam was our secret weapon, and we went on to have an awesome season. I enjoyed team dinners at the Oley's house, and I loved running with my sister Annie, my friends, and my classmates. Good times for sure." We also heard from Michael Bivens, AKA Tank, class of 1982, who wrote, "Coach Pete Oley, what an honor and a blessing to be coached by one of the greatest, along with the best assistant coaches. I marveled at how he figured out the track meet in his head, knowing how many points we needed to win even before the meet started. Coach Oley made everyone a winner, not only because of his love for track, but because he was always in the mindset of teaching and coaching and wanting to push us beyond our limit, trusting that we were always putting our best foot forward. He made sure that he did his job, but he also made sure we stayed honest with ourselves and did our jobs by training, studying hard, and being the best we could be. And here's a story from Ivan Sarda, class of 1983, entitled, "Holy Moly, What a Close Race." On a sunny weekend morning, the sound of a pistol launched 150 runners off to their last high school cross-country race. Determined not to burn out at the start, I had no idea where I stood in the pack as we entered the woods. But Mr. Oley provided a confident and early update. "You gotta pick up 15 spots, you can do it." Minutes later, I remember sucking wind and proudly thinking, I must have passed at least a dozen. But there again stood Mr. Oley in the woods. With confidence, he reported that I had moved up a number of spots. I struggled past a few more runners, and once again on a hill was Mr. Oley. "Charge up the hill. When you get to the top, charge down it as well. They'll never expect that." I picked up a few more places on the downhill, and towards the end of the woods, one last time, the trusty motivator stood. How does this man keep getting ahead of me? I wondered. Then, with a rush of optimism, he pointed forward and exclaimed, "Ivan, you gotta pass those two guys." Once again, I felt recharged. When a 3.1-mile race is decided within yards of the finish line, you realize just how fragile the chain of events were. Everything counted along the way. Every update, every piece of advice, every encouraging word, and each resulting boost of energy. No doubt, Mr. Oley stood in all the right places and said all the right things at just the right times. And of course, many of us knew Mr. Oley as one of our first history teachers at Dows Lane Elementary School. Rob Yazinsak, class of 1985, wrote in saying, "Peter Oley was the first teacher to inspire my interest in history in general, and of local history in particular. I cherish memories of walks along the old Croton Aqueduct, past the mansions, and in the woods behind the Irvington Reservoir up to the Hermit's Grave. These field trips off the beaten path piqued my interest and inspired me. Mr. Oley was kind to remember me years after my time in elementary school and to remain a mentor and friend all the way through my college years and beyond. He always greeted me with enthusiasm. 'Hey, Yaz. Hey, it's the Yaz.' I am grateful to have been one of Mr. Oley's students. In acknowledgement of his influence, generosity, and friendship, I dedicated my book, Hudson Valley Ruins, co-authored with my friend Tom Rinaldi, to Peter Oley, and also to Tom Johnson, another Irvington school teacher. Mr. Oley and Mr. Johnson helped me find the subject interest that still remains my passion, the roots of which go all the way back to Peter Oley's history lessons in elementary school." I too was inspired by Mr. Oley as both my teacher and as my coach. His lessons were engaging, his enthusiasm was contagious, and his classroom had no walls, literally and figuratively. He had a deep compassion and connectedness to the natural world that really guided and gilded his teachings. Whether he was telling his personal experiences of swimming in and protecting our precious Hudson River, singing the influential songs of Pete Seeger, or visiting the Hermit's Grave, Mr. Oley really embraced experiential, hands-on learning and breathed life into everything he taught. I clearly remember learning about the habits and habitats of the caribou in the tundra and how the Inuits carved tools and figures from soapstone. In fact, this is the very hippo that I carved in his class about 45 years ago. I will pass the baton next to Shiva Ramesh and Jeremy and Warren Adler.
Hi, how are you? It's Shiva Ramesh. I'm class of 2001 Irvington cross country, indoor track and outdoor track. Had the pleasure of running for Coach Oley, Coach Mo, and Coach Barry. And cross country, those are probably the fondest memories I have of Coach Oley, particularly in the summertime when he would drive us to Rockefeller State Park, or Rockies as he called it. And typically when we were driving with him, he would give a lot of the historical, perspective from the village of Irvington and Terrytown and Sleepy Hollow. And I remember going through lots and lots of red lights during that time. He would get so wrapped up in his stories. We were just all in the back thinking, okay, are we gonna survive the experience? But it was always memorable. We would always laugh about it afterward. And it was just great times in the summer and in the fall training for cross country and hearing his voice cheering us on. And for people like me, I wasn't the fastest person by any means, but it was always great to hear that voice cheering me on. And I have such great memories of running for Coach Oley. So he's definitely missed, a great mentor, teacher, friend, and coach. And hopefully this is one of many stories for the Historical Society. Thanks so much. Have a great day.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Adler. I ran for Coach Oley on his cross-country and track teams from 1995 until 1999. And with me is my twin brother, Warren Adler. Warren, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yes, Warren Adler here. Also ran cross-country and track for Coach Oley. I started with his cross-country team in '96 after running the previous spring track season, and ran also through the spring track season in '99. So those were some good years of track and field. It was a good time back then.
They were some good years. We ended up winning 2 section titles. We had a pretty strong team the third year as well in 1998. But maybe I can just start by talking about when I came on. We were not one of the stronger teams. In fact, looking back at the results from my freshman year, we were actually last or second to last in the section. But I have such fond memories of joining that team in 1995. My first week on the team was incredibly memorable. I got a letter from Coach Oley where he basically said, "Congratulations, you're on the cross-country team. Show up at the high school parking lot at this time and we'll be training." And, I hadn't even thought about joining the cross-country team. I didn't really know what it was, but it sounded like fun, so I showed up. And for that first week of training before school started, he would drive us out to Rockies and run us over the 13 bridges and all of the hills, really to the point of exhaustion, where I would then go home. My recollection is sleep till the next day and get up and do it again. And, after we would do the run each day, he would take us to bathe our legs in the cold water of the Rockefellers. And, we were not a particularly strong team that year, but he treated us exactly the same as he treated every other team. I mean, he was so into the process of getting kids to love running and love the process of training and teaching us about the sport that it really didn't feel any different from any of the other years where we were winning section championships.
It's very interesting that you say that, because Coach Oley had a long history of understanding track and field and understanding some of the different techniques. But to come in as a high school kid, you don't have that perspective. And a lot of what felt so casual at the time, I certainly didn't know that it was part of a deeper history of how he approached track and field. And Oley had this way of slowly revealing that to you through stories, through anecdotes about other runners, through anecdotes about track and field history. It all sort of came together in what just felt so natural and so much like you're developing as a runner and you're learning from him in the process, but not really feeling like any of it is forced.
No, it's very true. And, it was a very different time, too. Not only did we not know this history, we didn't have the internet. We couldn't even go out and learn this history very easily. And yet, by just spending time with him, he would do things like just start talking about, the flying Finns from the 1920s and 30s and their training. And I remember we went up to the Blue Mountain Running Camp one time, and he randomly just started talking about these things. And we didn't know where it was coming from, and only when he presented at the camp did we realize he had gone to Pavel Nurme's house and he had kind of learned all of these things over the summer. But they were lessons that we were able to learn that we certainly wouldn't have picked up any other way. There was no way we were going to hear about these people, these runners, this history, from any other source at that time.
and talking about, running before the internet, the other thing that was very hard to know about was who are your competitors, who are their coaches, what's going on elsewhere in the world of Westchester and New York State track and field. And he always knew all of that. He had his finger on the pulse of, you would be going to meets and early in the season, and he would know exactly who you're going to be racing and had all their stats. And I don't think, if we didn't have a coach that was so in touch with what was going on in the world of track and field around us, I don't even know how we would have approached learning what was going on in our competitors and learning what was going on at the other teams that we were racing against. He just very much was in touch with the world of track and field around us.
And I think that was one of the most rewarding things about the team, was being able to find people who could just, compete on the county and the sectional level because they had worked so hard.
I think one of the things that's really important to say about Oley, and one of the ways that I would describe him, is that he was a storyteller. Fundamentally, the experience of interacting with Oley as a coach was experiencing him as a storyteller, and it helped create a long arc of Irvington track and field history and broader track and field history. And he made you feel like you were part of something that was much bigger than the individual team that you were competing on at the time. And I think even in high school, you don't even necessarily appreciate that. We knew that he liked to talk, and you always got these great stories from him. But I think the further you get from it, you realize that was part of the experience, that he made you really realize you were part of something much bigger.
The student athlete, I think, is probably the title that he would have been most proud of for all of his athletes, being both good athletes and good students.
Hi, I'm David Allison, formerly David Darvasey, class of 1988. Because of Coach Oley, I was able to run quite well while at Irvington. Various league titles, all county awards, still to this day, some school records, and proudly a third place at the New York State meet in 1988 in the 4x400 meters. But more importantly, I became a coach and a teacher mostly because of Coach Oley. I still remember the gift he and Coach Mo gave me on my wedding day, a program copy from the highly competitive Loucks games. This was such a thoughtful gift because somehow in my senior year in 1988, I was lucky enough to win the boys 3,200 meter race. In this program were the names of all past champions by year for each event. And there on the 3,200 meter boys champions page was my name. What was even more amazing and moved me profoundly was that Mr. Oley had included the actual scratch sheet of paper where he had written out my splits during the race, which was bookmarking this page for the past 10 years. But sometimes we fall short of our goals, and that was when Coach Oley really shined. Coach Oley never got angry at you if you didn't perform well. For example, one time as an 8th grader, I had a great chance to win this freshman-only cross-country race up in Blue Mountain. Well, the night before was the middle school Halloween dance, and I went to it and danced a lot. Next day was Blue Mountain, and needless to say, I ran poorly. Coach Oley, knowing all the goings-ons around Irvington, calmly came up to me after the race and asked me, matter-of-factly, did you happen to go to the middle school dance last night? I shyly acknowledged the affirmative, and then he said, well, that's too bad, because you had a great chance of winning this race today. There was no malice in his voice, but just the almost fatherly tone that said, I believe in you, but you're young and know no better. Coach Oley treated you like family, and he had a heart big enough to pump the certainty, success, humility, humor, and integrity into the veins of anyone who was fortunate enough to be connected to him, either as a student, athlete, or in the community. Next, I'll be about Tom Bell, class of 1980, who wrote, having played football freshman year as a sophomore, I joined cross country for my junior and senior years. Being new to running, I still vividly remember Coach Oley telling me how to properly hold the hands and position my fingers while running. 43 years later, I'm still competing in road races and still hark back to his coaching and training methods, and yes, how I should be holding my hands. Next is Tim Bell, AKA T-Bell, class of 1985. He writes, Mr. Oley was my 5th grade teacher at Dows Lane, but the initial relationship expanded to being my track coach for 4 years and cross-country coach for 2 years. While I remember the phrases, the clock doesn't lie, and hip pockets, I think back and smile when I remember our local mini bus treks, setting up the tent, and the overnights to upstate New York and the Penn relays. I will always be grateful that he convinced me to give up my 140-pound tight end football career and get into distance running. I was fortunate to be a close friend and in the same class as his son Eric, which gave me the special bonus of having more time to be with Coach Oley and hear about those who came before me and regale me with those finished greats. Next is John Leone, high school class of 99. He writes, being part of the Coach Oley legacy was an incredible experience and honor. As many years have passed since Irvington High School athletics, I look back now as I appreciate even more the commitment, time, and lessons Coach Oley gifted to his team, students, and the village of Irvington. Next, Stan Liu, class of 1997, writes, Coach Oley was a constant figure of motivation with a jolly smile and a bellowing laugh to make us track runners feel welcome. Running came for me at a time when I needed it most. I had suffered the earth-shattering loss of a friend when Andrea, then a freshman at Irvington High, passed away. She was like family to me, and running gave me an outlet to channel that emotion into something other than grief. To this day, some 20 plus years later, running is still my greatest source of meditation and peace. I have Coach to thank for that. Much like me, many of the track team members of years yonder still run regularly and still motivate each other just like Coach Oley did all those years ago. We carry on his legacy mile after beautiful mile, every step of the way. And lastly, Sam Gordon, class of 2005, writes, in Mr. Oley's final year of coaching, I was the definition of average. But to Coach Oley, that made me significant. What made Mr. Oley a great coach, especially for me, was that he gave me the same level of encouragement to all his athletes, regardless of talent. Mr. Oley taught me to love running. He's the reason why I continued running during my first year in college. And despite a bout of mid-season tendonitis, I was able to will myself through my first marathon last May. It's a great regret of mine that I never had the opportunity to tell him this. Ironic then that Mr. Oley wanted running to be my 4th priority. Family, friends, and schoolwork all took precedence in his mind. He taught me more than anything that life was about balance, about love, about pursuing your passions. He's the reason why right now at 11:30 on a Sunday night, I'm writing this instead of reading 100 pages about medical anthropology for class tomorrow. He's the reason why I learned to balance my priorities. He's the reason why that most humbling moment of my life was receiving the first annual Peter Oley Scholarship. Up next is Peter Stork. He was part of the 1974 second place state cross country team, followed by Gina Neal and Chris Moore.
I remember I went back to visit Coach Oley in my 20s. I hadn't been back in a long time. I was feeling out of sorts. When I was in Irvington, it was the fall, a weekday. So in the afternoon, I drove up to the high school to see if he was up there running a cross-country practice. Sure enough, there he was over by his station wagon, some of his runners on the grass around him stretching out. Now I'm feeling all shy and self-conscious, but I really want to do this, so I walk on over. He sees me and his face just lights up. He's got that grin. He says, boys, this is Peter Stork. He starts rattling off my key races and times, cherry picking only the best. I'd seen him do that for 100 runners when I was in high school who came back to visit, but I'd forgotten. Now that he'd done it for me, I felt like $1 million.
All right,
Coach Oley.
we are being recorded. This is the Marr family trying for the third time, 3 times a charm.
Hip pockets.
The Marr family here, Neil Marr, Chris Marr, and Gina Marr. We're here to talk about our wonderful friend and coach and teacher, Pete Oley. We've known the Oley family for half a century since we moved to Irvington almost 50 years ago, right, Mom?
Yeah.
Yes, it's about 48.
Yeah, Peter and Mary Ann's eldest daughter, Ann, was a great friend of mine in grammar school and high school. Their son, Eric, one of Chris's best friends throughout.
Yo!
My mother coached with Pete Oley for decades. My father cut down crazy trees in our backyard with Pete Oley. He's a neighbor. I mean, the guy was in our life, and the Oleys were in our life forever with Mary Ann as well. So what we want to do today is we want to each tell a story about one aspect of our family's relationship with Pete. So I'm going to talk about Pete as a teacher. Chris is going to talk about Pete as a track coach, and my mom will talk about Pete as a track colleague, a fellow teacher, a friend, a neighbor, you know, all that stuff. So to begin with, I first met Pete Oley as a teacher when I was 8 years old. So for 3rd and 4th grade, I was in house 3. And in the middle school, the classes were divided into houses, and most houses had the students move from classroom to classroom. But house 3 was the progressive house, and we were in one giant room, the cafeteria, with 3 teachers and 75 kids. And when people looked down there during the day, they called it the zoo, because we were all so loud and boisterous. People thought we were just playing around, but it turned out the reason we were so turned on was because of people like Pete Oley, who turned us on to learning in that room. And I remember a couple times the way Pete did that was he didn't just teach us, he had us do things that really got us excited about learning. So rather than teach us about Eskimos, somehow Pete Oley found soapstone, which Eskimos carved. He brought it into the classroom, and we're sitting there carving it with little, saws or something. Another instance was the geodesic dome in the 70s. This was a huge, big, popular thing. So somehow Peter Oley found these giant cardboard, 6 feet big squares, and we built a 25-foot dome that the 70 kids huddled under during class meetings. But the most, amazing memory I ever had of any educational experience was when Pete Oley didn't just tell us about the Irvington Hermit, but he got us out and hiked up through the woods from Main Street School, up the high school hill, into the woods that today bear his name, to the Hermit's grave. And when we got there, he told us all about Johann Wilhelm Stolting and how he was this educated man from Germany who became a recluse and made his living by carving these little wooden buttons, right? And then Pete did the classic Pete Oley. He turned to the other side of where the grave was and said, dig, because Pete Oley knew where the man's house was. So we all went over and started digging, and we found buttons and bottles and little nails from this man's home. I mean, today we couldn't do that, but back then it was one of the most, memorable learning experiences of my life. And on the way home, Pete Oley wasn't feeling that well, and I never saw that because he was such a, strong guy. But he asked if I could carry his pack back down to the middle school because he felt a little bit weak. And, I've never been prouder, as a 3rd or 4th grader in my life up until then to be carrying Pete Oley's backpack. So I just wanted to say thank you to Pete Oley and the Oley family for giving me this teacher who didn't just teach me, but taught me how to be really, really excited about learning. And he did that by having us do it. We went out there and did it. So that's my memory of Pete Oley as a teacher. And now I'll pass it on to my brother to discuss Pete Oley as a track coach.
Thanks, Neil. And as Coach Oley would say, awesome. That was awesome. I've got a laundry list of memories of Coach Oley, but I'll pick a few quick ones here. For all the gifts that Coach Oley had, and it is a long list of them, I think one of his most special gifts was how he made every kid on that track team, boy or girl, freshman, senior, best runner, maybe not as talented, that they were critically important to our success as a team. And so whether you were Tom Quinn or Tim Bell or Fran Abagu or Nan Pfister or Tara Fitzpatrick,
who was going to go out and probably win, multiple races for us every dual meet and get us those 10 points. He was talking to everybody on that team about how they could contribute a point or a couple of points to the success of our team. And I think that was a really special gift of his, that he made every child in that program feel like that they could contribute to our success. And of course, part of it was about winning meets, and he went 40 some odd years without losing a dual meet. But it was really just teaching us a really important lesson about life, of doing our best, trying to improve each and every day. And maybe we, as a freshman, you didn't score a point, but he would let you know when you beat your PR by 5 seconds or 10 seconds. And by the time you were a senior, you were contributing points on a regular basis. And so that's one of my lasting memories of Coach Oley, and just the lessons he taught us, and that it just everybody mattered and everybody counted. And so that is something that I will remember for the rest of my life. So with that, I will hand over to you, Mom.
Right, and you're so right about that, Chris, because Coach Oley was able to put together teams where everybody did matter, because he really, really cared about everybody on the team, not just the stars of the team. And I would ride the bus we would meet outside the school, get on the bus on a Saturday morning for a big meet, and there was no talking going up. There was all business, and he had his pencil and he had his notes, and he was looking, and he was deciding this one would go here. And then he would say to me, where are the girls going to go? Would you have this girl go here, this girl go there? It was all business, all talk. And we would get up there, and every person that was on that bus felt important. It was part of winning. Whether it was a dual meet or a championship meet, every person did it because he had figured it out, and he had done it in a way that every person on the team mattered. The bus ride home, however, was another story. The bus ride home, he was free, he had done it, and we would start through the towns, and no matter where we were, there was a story. There was a story about the guy who owned the barber shop. There was a story about somebody who walked the paths of the river, or there was a story about the environment. But there was always a story and a history, and a lot of humor was thrown into it. He would tell little anecdotes about, well, they were funny people, but they did this and they did that. And he just was a wonderful, wonderful man. And buses rides were important. And I know everybody that went to the Penn Relays with Pete Oley must remember how he would drive to the Penn Relays. The school had a minibus, and there'd be maybe 12 kids on the minibus going down to Penn Relays. And he would hit that place, and he'd go to make a turn and hit the curb, and he'd go to make another turn and hit another curb, and he would just say, Curb City. He also made it a point on those trips to Philadelphia, which is such a great historical place, to stop at the Rocky Steps, and everybody would run the Rocky Steps. And we would always go to the museum and do wonderful things. He was just a great, great, great friend, a great man. He and his wife were just fantastic people and good friends of ours. And I'm so privileged and lucky to have had over 25 years coaching with Peter Oley. And I thank him very much.
One thing we've all talked about is it's not just about getting to a place with Pete, right? Yeah. It's about the trip. It's about the journey, and how much you get out of that travel with him. Traveling through life with Peter Oley was memorable and worth a lot. So I think that's a great way to think about him.
Right.
Yeah. That's a great point.
Amazing trip. It was an amazing trip.
Chris, you can end with your saying. Go ahead.
Hip pockets. Hip pockets.
All right, we love you, Oleys. We love Pete Oley, and thanks for including us in this great, great tribute. Thanks so much, everybody.
Thanks, everyone.
Everybody. Thanks.
Wow, Curb City. Yes, indeed. Hello, my name is Noah Kornman. I'm the class of 92, half miler, reluctant 1,000-meter runner, and an occasional triple jumper. Coach Oley is a lot of things to a lot of people. And for me, he started as my neighbor, the dad of some of my neighborhood friends. There were always a lot of multi-talented and fun folks up on Riverview Road, a lot of Riverview Road. He was my math teacher at Dows Lane, and eventually I found my way onto the track after getting unceremoniously cut from the tennis team my junior year. Let's get to this. The beauty of Peter K. Oley, the human being, is he loved you for who you were, whether you were the state champion
or the last one across the finish line. He met you where you were to celebrate you for you. He created a culture of community and joy, and in the midst of all of it, a tradition of teamwork and spirit that led to incredible success, a tradition that continues and is a source of great pride for the village of Irvington. Now I'm going to share a few stories. This is from Barbara Ginsburg, Dows Lane librarian and a colleague of Peter Oley. Let's see if we can get this up here. There it is. Thanks so much for reaching out to Peter's former colleagues to share memories of one of the most unique individuals I have ever known. Peter had all the hallmarks of a great teacher. He was unflaggingly patient, caring, and kind, and had the unique ability to develop relationships with each of his students while actively engaging them in learning. We were fortunate enough to be teaching in Irvington in the quote, golden years, that incredible time when there was no such thing as teaching to the test, and the staff was not hampered in their teaching styles. And Peter's style was unique. I can vividly remember walking into his classroom after his class had just gotten back from one of their local field trips to the Hermit's Grave and getting a rousing rendition of John Jacob Jingleheimer Schmidt. My first encounter with Peter was in the fall of 1986 when I first arrived at Dows Lane as the new librarian. Steve Fisher, the superintendent at that time, introduced me at the Superintendent's Day meeting as his recruit from Scarsdale. As the meeting was breaking up, someone tapped me on my shoulder, and when I turned around, there was Peter asking me if I was related to David Ginsburg. When I said that I was his mother, his eyes lit up, and he started dragging people over to me, exclaiming, "Do you know who this is? This is David Ginsburg's mother. He's the greatest runner in all of Westchester." I know I'm not alone when I say that you cannot think of Peter without having a giant smile on your face. Next is Tom Johnson, Irvington High School colleague, art and photography teacher, and of course, the backbone of Willie and the Wonders as their drummer. From Tom, when I came to Irvington High School in 1978 to teach art and photography, I was soon to meet Mr. Peter Oley. We would often have informal sessions in the halls that covered all sorts of topics, but mostly his beloved Irvington. I know that Pete, by example, made me a more knowledgeable and better teacher. One fact about these talks is that they were never a minute or too long, and I rarely wanted them to be shorter, even when I was in a hurry. As we worked together to further the interest in our students to know about their village and the surrounding area, I realized that we were a team. This was best displayed in how we helped Rob Yasensak research and photograph the ruins in the Hudson Valley. I know that one of his proudest accomplishments is that Rob dedicated the book he co-authored with Tom Rinaldi to Peter Oley. Next up, this is from Tim Fulton, a coaching colleague. Coach Oley was simply one of the nicest men I have ever met, a true gentleman and a great lover of track and field. As a coach, he was superb. His squads were always well-rounded and competed as a team, something not all track and field teams achieve. His stats are proof of his coaching ability, but spend any amount of time around him, and you saw what all of his athletes did over the years, that he loved everyone he met. I got to know Pete a little better at running camp every summer, spending time listening to his jokes and hearing about his world travels. Pete always asked me about my granddad, always congratulated me on my latest accomplishments as a coach, and always bragged about his kids, be it his actual children or the ones he coached. Peter Oley is one of the most successful outdoor track and cross-country coaches the state has ever seen. Overall, his track and cross-country teams captured a combined 27 Section 1 titles and helped Peter earn 12 Coach of the Year accolades. Next up, this is from Jim Riesler, a New York Times sports writer from a 1995 New York Times article. Looking south on a fall day from Peter K. Oley's third floor deck, high above Irvington, there is a view all the way to the Manhattan skyline. Look west, and there is a view of Irvington's business district and the Hudson River. About the only landmark that cannot be seen is Irvington High School's all-weather track, officially named the Peter K. Oley Track. Good, said Oley's wife, Marianne, with a laugh. We see it often enough. In the basement study of Oley's house were photographs and memorabilia, including dozens of team photos of past Irvington cross-country and track teams. Oley can recall almost every runner down to their best times, who their parents are, where they went to college, and what they do today. Quote, "Our records are a testimonial to all these kids and this community where there has always been a lot of support," Oley said. "This is a hard sport, and I've always managed to have and bring along a bunch of incredibly motivated kids with a real work ethic. It's a real tradition we have here now." And finally, from me, as many of you have heard, there are just too many stories to count. Runs at Rockefeller, AKA the Rockies, Penn Relays adventures, Curb City, the New York State meet, the iconic booming arms coming across the field as I was digging deep for a final 100-meter kick. I will share one of the moments that was seemingly simple and at the same time was everything. There was an open meet one winter weekend up at West Point. It wasn't an Irvington track team event, but coach suggested I go compete in the 1,000-meter dash. My father and I got up early to make the trek north. Thanks, Dad. The meet was going to be our whole day. To my great surprise, when we arrived, there was the unmistakable presence of Coach Oley, holding court, quoting the times run by officials there from their youth, sharing tales of other meets there, and introducing me and my father as only Peter K. Oley could. And he didn't have to be there. This was a weekend when he could have been home, taking a trip, taking a nap. But he gave that day to me. I couldn't tell you what my time was that day. He, of course, could. But I can tell you that it didn't matter. I could have turned around and gone home after seeing him and felt loved, supported, seen, and celebrated. Beyond the iconic moments of awards and accolades and championships, these were the moments that define the man that he was. In the end, the thing that Coach Oley showed us was just how awesome things can be. And no matter where you might be on any given day, high, low, or in between, Coach Oley would make sure that you had some awesome worked into your day, your week, and your life. It was an honor to know him and a continuing honor to know his kids and his grandkids. Long live Peter K. Oley. Next up, we've got a video from Chris Berry.
Hi, I'm Chris Berry. I have been here in Irvington for 22 years. I've been the boys and girls cross country coach for the past 15 years and boys spring track coach as well. I was lucky enough to, when I first got here, work with Coach Oley as his assistant for my first 7 years in the spring. Some memories I have of Coach Oley, he knew everything about every event, first of all. And he was always thinking about the big picture. Not only was he somebody who wanted to make sure we had the most talent lined up, the best for us team-wise, but he also wanted to make sure everything was under control and as good as it could be. One example I remember from that is we went to an invitational in Mamaroneck, I believe, and he gave me the relay cards. In the old days, pre-computer, you put the card, fill them out by hand and put them in the appropriate envelope. And he gave me the cards to put in. And I had coached for 6 years before I got here, so I was comfortable doing that. And yet, as I put in the cards in the 4x100, the 4x200, the distance medley relay, I saw that he was watching behind me to make sure that I put the right card in the right envelope. So that's when I realized he was serious and he wasn't going to accept any mistakes in that regard. And over time, having worked with him for 7 years, happily we got to a point, I think, where we had a level of trust and support for each other. Another moment I remember is as we were planning out our league championship meet, which we always did extremely thoroughly after practice one day. We had it all set up except for the 4x400 relay. We were looking for one more man. And I think at this point the DeCesar twins were young. Scott DeCesar was still available for an event. And he said, well, who could it put in for the fourth leg? And I said, what about Scott DeCesar in the fourth leg for the 4x4? And he had that big smile, and he had that grin that those who remember Pete remember well. And he just looked at me and just goes, Coach, that's a good move. So then I knew I was in, I was okay, so it was good. The things about his program that I remember and that I have tried to do the best to continue, it's all about everyone. Everyone has a role to play. It's not about what talent level you have. We've been lucky enough, and Coach Oley was certainly lucky enough, and the record board behind shows this, to have some tremendous athletes. Scott and Casey DeCesar were both Division I athletes, both went to UCLA, both individual state champions in the pole vault. We had relays go to states repeatedly, multiple section championships, and the main thing was the league championship. We always tried to win the league championship every year. And yet there's not just a role for those talented types, but a role for everybody. Even if it was, being the fourth guy in the mile, everybody knew that they were contributing to a team title, ideally, and that's something we've tried to keep going. I've been lucky also to have some talented runners, and we've had some successes, certainly. I tell people, earnestly, I truly believe my job is to try to keep the ball rolling. He was here for 50 years. I've been here now as head coach for 15, and it's always astounding to me to think that I feel like I've been doing it for a while, but 15 compared to 50. But we've had, hopefully the same kind of thing with large teams. We've won some sectional titles with cross country in recent years. This past fall, as weird as it was, our boys and girls both did very well. And in our indoor program, we've had some good success. The boys won a sectional title last year, just before the pandemic shut everything down. This past winter, where we had no meets basically because the snow took out the track, we had a couple of scrimmages early. We were able to have one meet in a parking garage over at the Palisades Mall. And in many ways, I think it captured what Coach Oley's view of track was all about. It was everybody cheering as hard as they could, everybody running as hard as they could on pavement in a parking lot. Our boys 4x600 relay, which is not an usual event, did extremely well. Got nipped at the line by Somers, otherwise best team out there. And our girls 4x300 relay won the whole thing. And again, not relays you normally run, but we had a 300-meter track indoors, and the spirit and the cheering and the excitement and the competition, Coach Oley would have loved it. And I think it just shows what our kids are up for. If it's a garage, they're going to work hard. They're going to cheer for each other. Everyone's going to have a role. Our top kids are going to do really well, but every kid's going to have a role, and I think that's one of the principles that in our program we've had that Coach Oley established. So, like I said, I'm honored to try to continue his legacy as best I can, but very lucky to have gotten to work with him, and very lucky to have gotten to take over after he finally retired after 50 years.
It's been fun presenting our Irvington icon. It's clear that Pete's light continues to shine on. His stories, his impact are like a relay baton, passed on to all of us here who shall carry it on. Okay, waiting for our panelists to check back in here. Here we go. Very nice. Thanks one and all for being here. We're gonna use the chat button to take any questions or comments, but I would like to begin first of all by thanking all of you who tuned in today. We had a big number, and it's really great that so many people are interested. Just speaks volumes about the impact Peter's had on so many people. But I'd like to start the chat with a question for Eric, actually, and I'm curious what you think, Eric, what your dad would have thought about this particular presentation today.
Oh, he would have been absolutely thrilled. He loved hearing from his former athletes and students, and he heard from them often. They often came back, like Peter Stork was mentioned in his speech. And I know that he also felt really appreciated during his lifetime when he was teaching, when he was coaching, and then also when he was in retirement. And, you know, from the bottom of the Oley family's heart, I would just like to say thank you to the community for making him feel that way.
Nice. Yeah, as people have gone into the hip pockets and the curved city, I'm sure there were smiles all around the place as people remembered the various quirks and the things that were unique to him. Okay, Nancy Fisher, this is going to be to you. What is the finish line? Since you were the one who came up with that title.
That's a tribute to Peter Oley's heritage, because he was proud of his heritage. He talked about it all the time. It just was an integral part of who he was. I mean, obviously our heritage is, but he really took pride in it. And I loved hearing his stories. I mean, we all talk about the stories, but I just thought that was apropos for this because of that.
I think you had marrying a Finn, right? Father-in-law's a
right
Olympian javelin thrower. So the Finnish connection was very strong. Eric, there might be a question here for you. Was Peter a runner himself when he was young? I know he ran in high school.
Absolutely. And he had an incredible mentor in Doc Rasbeck when my father was a runner at North Tarrytown High School. And I think my father got so much out of that relationship that he went to college to become a teacher, to study teaching, and then he became a teacher and a coach. And he just really wanted to help people the same way that I think Doc Rasbeck helped him. So it's a wonderful cycle that continues on and still continues on to this day.
I would say the DNA is pretty strong in that Oley household, with son Liam. And I just want to do a shout out for Liam while we're talking here about what a great job he did with the music. It was, we putting this thing all together, and just to hear it in its entirety was really special. It was awesome. We actually have somebody who checked in from Finland. This must be a Oley connection. Right, Ollie, right? You have any connection to you, Eric, from Finland. You guys looking at the chat string? So is there any other questions here? Fred Kellogg, thanks for chiming in. Good to hear from you. Class of 62, this is awesome. Carl Haggerty, you were in there at one point on the Empire State Games. I believe we saw your picture on
Here's in a photo, yes.
Here's another one for Eric. What happened to Peter's MG?
You know what? I don't know. I mean, I have no memory of that, but I found the pictures, obviously. I think my mom gave it the kibosh. He bought that pre-Marianne Oley. And I know that when they came home, my father met my mother in Finland when he had gone to Europe during the summer to follow track meets around Europe. And Helsinki would always host a big meet during the summer. And he ended up befriending some Finnish athletes, and went to a party after one of the meets and met my mother there. Because like you mentioned, my mother's father was I think he was president of the Finnish Track Association at that time. He had already been an athlete earlier. And they ended up getting married in Finland a couple years later, and they came home on a boat from to the United States, and they also brought a Volvo home. So he had a Volvo wagon when he was first married with my mom. Red car was gone.
Gone. Well, similar of the bachelor days, I guess.
Yes, exactly.
And Gene, of course, Deutscher wrote in when he wrote his thing about how memorable that trip was to do with Peter in the MG. That must have been something. Yeah, just a lot of great comments are coming in here. Here's just a wonderful thing from Steve Hamburg about buying Pete tickets to the '72 Olympics and sitting with him in Munich. Awesome. You got me saying awesome. That must have been a tremendous experience. And again, a lot of thanks here, a lot of great comments about Coach Oley. Oh, Debbie King, yep, Talbot. So there's one question here. I don't know, Nancy, if you know this, but when the girls' track program started at Irvington cross country, I have a sense it was a few years or a year or two after the Title IX kicked in 72. I think somewhere around there, maybe it started. Is that your sense of it also?
Yep, I believe so. That predates me, but or not me, but the time that I was running. But yeah, that sounds about right. I think so. At least mid 70s at the very least.
Okay. Here's a.
Hi, Annie.
Here's another one, Eric. Gray Volvo fastback before the station wagons.
Yeah, so I have memories of that in our driveway. It was under a tarp in our driveway in Irving Place. My father never got it running again, but that was the car that they brought home from Sweden. I mean, they brought it home from Sweden. It was shipped from Sweden when my parents were first married. So I see Byron Haynes there. I think that's Byron Haynes asking about a Saab, but Byron, it was not a Saab, it was a Volvo.
Okay, and I think Annie Talbot's got a nice memory here, which I can certainly recall swimming across the reservoir with the team. And I remember, I should not say this, but this was years ago, so maybe I get away with it. But I remember we used to put our shoes on one side, we'd barefoot to the other side, so that when we swam across and the police happened to show up, we'd have our shoes on and we could take off. And I didn't ever have any doubts that we would be able to stay clear because it was a runner and they knew the woods, so we were okay with that.
This is being recorded. So
Yeah.
just say.
Zach Lynch would have caught us, I think.
Statute of limitations, hopefully.
Hello, Talbots.
Yeah.
Talbots.
So Fribbles. Anybody want to ask about? Anybody have a memory of Fribbles?
Well, that's Sue Broadhurst there. Yes, we would often stop at Friendly's, the restaurant establishment, and my father's favorite drink ever was probably a Friendly Fribble, which is a very thick shake. So yes, we've had many Friendly Fribbles over the years.
Okay. What was his flavor of choice?
He would actually get a mocha, which is a combination of chocolate and coffee ice cream. Thank you for asking, though.
Okay, Eric, here's another one for you. And Eric, of course, is a real historian in this group, that's for sure. But what about the Finnish Umflas, old sweatsuits?
Oh, those were some awesome. I don't know if we had any pictures of them, but there was one year. My parents would go back to Finland a lot because my mother was obviously from Finland. So during the summers, my father was a teacher. We would go back when I was very young in the early 70s to Finland during the summers. And one time he found these really cool sweatsuits. They were different than like the baggy ones that they had in the United States. They were kind of streamlined, and they were this great green color with a white collar. And he got kids to like pool money, and he probably got my mom's family to organize an order, and they ordered these sweatsuits from Finland, which of course they must have looked incredibly unique at the track meets and the cross country meets in Westchester. But those were those.
Well, it sounds like there was maybe a change in direction when Tom Quinn ended up wouldn't wear the green shorts with the no lining, so the satin shorts. Those were a little bit of a different fashion move.
If you break 50 seconds in the quarter mile, you can wear whatever shorts you want, Scott.
There you go. There you go. Okay, Coach took a shopping idea from Yvonne. Yeah, I think he did that all the time. You just say to a kid after practice, "Look, you need a new pair of track shoes. We're going to the Westchester Road Runner. Get in the car and off they'd go." Routine. That was just the way, and probably paid for it a bunch of times as well. Knowing Coach Oley.
When I first ran around the track, he wanted to see what I had. I was wearing tree torns, and he very quickly got those off of me and got me into proper running shoes.
Okay. Another memory you got another one from Finland. You seen that one, Eric?
Yeah, well, that's Antti Nikku. This was after my time, but I remember that we had a couple of Finnish students come to take a couple of years of high school in the United States, and Antti was one of those. Hi, Antti.
I'm remembering that also.
Yeah.
Okay. Some more comments here. And Chet, I saw I'll save that question for later, Chet, about the next Oh, wow. This is an interesting one about from the 60s. There was a young lady that ran. Obviously, there was no team for the young ladies at that point, but Coach Oley worked with her. That's awesome. Okay. Unless anybody's got a last question for us here, I would like to, a couple of things. One, I mentioned earlier in the presentation that we will try to put together another Peter Oley presentation, because this just encompasses one part of Peter Oley. His role as a village activist and environmentalist and historian. He was the president of the society for many years. There's a whole other part of Peter Oley that we'd like to put out at some point. It'll take a while to put that together, of course, but eventually we'll get to that. And I just, Eric, I just want to say thanks to your family. As I looked at this, I've watched this now a bunch of times, obviously, but I just have to think what a remarkable woman your mom was. To give Peter the freedom to just be so important in so many kids' lives, and that's hard, I think, when the spouse at home, and yet off he was down going off to track meets. I think you probably attended more track and cross country meets than any other kid in America by the time you were 10, which meant you were in the car and driving, and mom was home, of course, with the girls or whatever. But remarkable family that you all had, and again, your wife was I keep saying your wife, she's special too, but I meant to say your mom, just a saint. Always admired her. So in any event, thanks again to everybody. I think this has been it's been really fun for me, for us. I think I couldn't have picked 4 better folks to join in here, and obviously the video folks. If you guys are watching, you guys were terrific. I would like to end with the Irvington Historical Society President, Veronica Gedrich. Hi, Veronica.
Hi, Scott, and congratulations, webinar team. You've put together a wonderful tribute to a wonderful guy. I think we all really appreciate your work. Thank you again. And thank you, visitors, for joining us today. If you've missed any of our recent programs, they've been posted on our website, www.irvingtonhistoricalsociety.org.